In this video, we're going to discuss how to solve the palindrome problem using recursion. In other words, what we have to do is to write a short program, one single method, that given a sequence of characters determines whether or not that sequence of characters is a palindrome. A palindrome is a sequence of characters that if you write it forward and backwards, it spells the same. For example, ACA is a palindrome because if you spell it forward and backwards, it's exactly the same. 121, if you print it forward and backwards, prints the same, is also a palindrome. So what is the base case? Well, the base case is trying to reverse a sequence of characters of exactly length 1. If I ask you a question, is 7 a palindrome, then you need to determine that you write 7 forwards and backwards is the same, it's a single. So the answer is yes, it's a palindrome. If I ask you, is the sequence of characters B, a single character B, a palindrome? The answer is yes, because if we write B forward and backwards, it spells exactly the same thing. So my base case is when my string of characters that I want to test has exactly one character. Another base case, by the way, could be if the string is empty, right? An empty string is a palindrome because if you print it forward and backwards, you're printing nothing, but it's always the same. So again, my base case is when my sequence has one character or none. Now, what happens if my sequence of characters has, 23 characters or 26 characters? It doesn't matter, by the way, if the numbers of characters is odd or even. So what is the technique? The technique that I'm going to apply to solve the problem is recursion. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to compare the first and the last value. Why is that? Because if the values are different, then if I print the word backwards and then I print the same word forwards, then if the characters, the first one and the last one, are not the same, it's not going to be the same. So if the first and the last values are not the same, I can immediately conclude that this is not a palindrome. Okay? Now, if that is not the case, meaning the first and the last characters are the same, then what do I need to do? Well, then I need to say, okay, let me create a substring that excludes, that strips the first one and the last one because I already concluded that those two are the same. So now I need to compare the second and the next to the last one. And if those are the same, I need to compare the third one and the next to the last one, and so on and so forth. So the technique is compare the first and the last value of the string that we have, and if they are the same, I need to eliminate those, strip the string from the first one and the last one, and then use the same procedure, the same analysis with the substring that is left. In other words, compare the first and the last character of the substring, so on and so forth. So if I were to put this in code, I have a method called isPalindrome that it takes a sequence of characters, which happens to be my string S. So what is the best case? The best case has to be, again, when I have exactly one value or none in my sequence, in my string of characters. So my base case, as usual, is the if statement. And if the length of my string is 0, empty string, or the length is 1, a single character, then I'm going to return true. That is a palindrome. Okay? Now, if I have more than one character, then I need to compare the first with the last value in my string. I'm going to do the comparison that I have here. And an easy case will be if they are not equal. If the first character and the last character are not equals, then if I write it forward and backwards, it's not going to spell the same because the first one and the last character are not the same. Okay? So I can conclude right away that whatever sequence I have is not going to be a palindrome. So what do? I'm going to do this else part. And the first thing that I do here is to store into a character the first character, and I'm using the method character add, and then the last character is also character add, but now it's going to be the index of the last character, which is the length minus 1. So index 0 is the index of the first character, and index length minus 1 is the index of the last character. So once I have those two, then I can compare them. And if they are different, then I know it's not a palindrome. So I can immediately return false. But if they are the same, then I need now to make a recursive call and reduce the size of the problem. So here I'm making the recursive call and I'm passing s. But what is s? Well, s is now a substring, okay, a substring that excludes the first character and the last character of the original string. So what I'm asking here is to create a new substring that again excludes the first character, so it starts with index 1, not index 0, and excludes, okay, the last character, which is the length -1. So bottom line is that this substring method happens to be very useful. If you're not familiar with the substring, this will be a good time to go to the Java API, look up the string class, and understand how the substring method works. And once I make the recursive call, then I'm going to compare the length and then decide whether it's true or not, compare the first one and the last one. So every time that I go into this else part, I'm reducing the size of the problem by eliminating the first and the last character and then making a recursive call. Here I'm showing you exactly the solution that we just discussed. So I'm in my method main, all I'm doing is calling my method is palindrome, and I'm going to pass a string, a sequence of characters. And in this case, I'm starting with a sequence of characters that has only one character. And of course, the output is true. A single character is always a palindrome. Let's review the code. The base case is if the string I'm given is either empty or has exactly one character, like the one I just did, in which case all we need to do is to return true. Then if I have more than one character, then I need to compare the last character with the first one. Character at 0 and the character at length -1, which is the last one. And if those are different, then I know the answer. It is not a palindrome, okay? So let's do one example, A followed by a B. Well, obviously the first character, A, is not equal to the last character, which is B. So this should print false. This is not a palindrome. So let's test it. And indeed, it prints false. Okay? The third thing that I'm going to do is, if I'm not at the base case and the two characters are not different, that means the two characters, the first one and the last one, are the same. So what do I need to do? Make a recursive call. Well, here it is. I'm calling the method is palindrome. But now, instead of using the original string, again, I'm going to use a substring that excludes the first character and the last character of the original because that ones have been tested. And that's by using the method substring 1 length -1. Okay? So if I have now things like this, right? Like A, that is a palindrome because this forward and backwards spells the same. So let's test it. Okay? It's going to print true. If I have things like, for example, ABA, right, it's also going to be true. Why is that? Because again, if you spell this forward and backwards, it's the same. So let's do some analysis with this one here. Okay, so the first time the value of S is ABA. So obviously it's not the base case. I'm going to go in here. So I'm comparing the first character, which is an A, with the last character, which is an A. So they happens to be the same. So this is false. So I'm going to be going there, right? So it's going to be now the substring. But the substring is a new string that excludes the first one and the last one. So it's only B. And when I make my recursive call, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to see, oh, the length is 1 because it's only B. Therefore, return true. Okay? So it's a very elegant, simple solution to the problem of whether or not a sequence of characters is a palindrome using recursion.